Hey guys, what's going on? So we're gonna talk about in this stream I'm gonna talk about some care tips and mistakes that people make when they're buying new plants or when they're new to the plant hobby. And I'm also gonna talk about my inspiration and journey into taking care of plants and all the stuff that I do with plants. So it started out when probably about 5 or 6 years ago when I was into keeping lizards and frogs and stuff like that. And I originally had them just like the most basic setups you can think of, like the sand and like the tile and the liners and stuff like that. And this like the basic setups with like the fake highs and everything. And after a while, I kind of got into wanting to make bioactive setups with live plants and stuff like that. And then from there, I got into doing more plant stuff and learning more about plants. And eventually, that got me to where I am now, where I'm making videos about plants. And so some of my other inspirations behind doing my videos and my plant stuff is some people like Serpa Design and Brian Barsick, Tyler Nolan, Camp Cannon, Schindler's Wildlife, all those channels you guys would probably be familiar with if you're into plants and reptiles. And so some of the things that I see people making mistakes with whenever they buy a new plant or get into the plant hobby is they don't do research on a specific plant. Like, I mean, there's some plants out there that need some really crazy care requirements in order to make them thrive well enough. And so some of the mistakes that people make have to do with research, overwatering, underwatering, lighting requirements, and temperature requirements. Now, when you get started on plants and you don't know much about a plant, make sure you do all the research you can, even if you just bought one and you think you know stuff about it. Sometimes there's different things that you can learn about plants. Like, I don't know everything about every kind of plant there is. I do my research while doing different things with that plant to see what works best for it. And that got me to know what I can and can't do with different ones. Different plants have different requirements. And so just do research on plants and then start your collection slowly and take care of low maintenance plants first, which would be things like golden pothos or parlor palms and etc. and stuff like that. Those are some pretty simple plants to take care of. The next thing I see people make mistakes with is the type of potting media that they use, along with the type of pot that they have their plants in. Potting media, there's so many different types of potting media these days. Like there's sphagnum moss, there's peat moss, there's leca, like there's clay pebbles for growing plants in water, and then there's potting soil, potting mix, and then there's different mixtures of different things as well. So just do your research on the type of potting media that you need for your plant and what type of benefits or pros and cons that come with that type of potting media. I grow plants in different types of potting media myself. Like I have it's like the sea starter mix. I mix it with a few different things like perlite and sand, and sometimes I add like special things in there like worm castings and stuff like that for nutrients for whenever I'm watering it and it needs a boost. But on top of that, whenever you're doing things with potting media and the type of pot that you use, a lot of people buy those pots that they have in like the big box stores where it has like the little pot, like a real decorative pot, and then it has the other pot inside of it. And that issue that you have with that is when you're watering it, your water is draining to the bottom of that, but it's not draining out of the decorative pot because there's no drainage holes on it. So you can either drill a couple of drainage holes in the bottom of that one, or you can take the pot that's in that cash pot and put it in another larger decorative one that actually has drainage holes in it. And then the type of potting media that you use as well has to do with drainage. So there's different types of potting medias that drain better and faster, and others that don't drain as fast or as well. Like, let's see, there's peat moss based potting media, there's sphagnum moss based potting media, there is basic garden soil, there's things that have a lot of clay in it, there's also things that have a lot of like chunky stuff in it, like organic material. And you want to look for things that have decent sized chunks of other things in there, like perlite, vermiculite, and sticks, and wicked bark, and stuff like that. That will help your potting media drain out fast enough and well enough so that you're not overwatering your plant. Because when you overwater your plant, it can lead to root rot, or with the top of your soil being wet for too long, it can attract pests, and that will in turn cause more issues for your plant down the road. So one of the things that I tell people whenever they buy a new plant, because I've had people ask me about plants whenever they buy them, they ask me what to do with their plant when they buy a new one. And I tell them the first and foremost thing that you want to do is quarantine your plant. What I mean by that is putting it in an area completely away from any of the other plants that you might already have. Put it in a clear bucket with a lid, and make sure you have enough light in that area and the area is warm enough. And then what you would want to do is keep it in that bucket for at least 2 weeks to a month just to see how it does. And that will give you an indication of whether or not there's any pest on it and there's any other issues that you might have with it. Another thing that you want to do is make sure that you don't have like a cash pot around the outer of that and inside of that pot, so that you can avoid the overwatering or underwatering and stuff like that. I see a lot of people asking questions about what are the differences between potting soil and potting mix. And my takeaway on that is, I'm gonna find it here. So the difference between potting mix and potting soil, it basically is the difference in the ingredients and texture, and they each have their own set of pros and cons. So basically, potting mix is basically just a blend of organic materials such as peat moss, coconut coir, vermiculite, perlite. It's really light and fluffy in texture. It's specifically formulated to improve drainage and aeration so that your roots end up growing around the entire area of the pot that it's in. It's also free of any type of like weed seeds, like the weeds that you would see outside in the grass. It's also free of pests and diseases, making it ideal for seed starting and transplanting young plants. However, it can end up being more expensive than potting soil and may require more frequent watering due to its light texture, unless you add other things to it to help retain some of that moisture. Potting soil, on the other hand, is a mixture or blend of topsoil or garden soil, sand, or perlite, and organic matter such as compost or animal manure. It's got a little bit heavier texture and it's best suited for plants that require more moisture, such as herbs and fruits and vegetables. And it's more affordable than potting mix and requires a little bit less watering depending on the plant that you have it planted in. It can and usually does contain weed seeds, some pests, and diseases, and it may not have the same level of drainage as potting mix. But ultimately, the choice of the type of potting media that you use is up to you yourself and what you think your plant would do better with. If you think your plant needs more drainage and aeration, then use potting mix. If you think it needs more moisture and needs to hold more water in it, then use potting soil. It's just up to you. And it also depends on what type of pot you might be putting your pot in, your plant in. Now, some tips on finding the correct or the right pot for your plant. There's a few different things that comes down to that. So you want to determine the type of plant that you want to pot. Different plants will require a different type of pot because different pots have different numbers of drainage holes. They also have different sizes, and then they also have different types of material that they're made out of, like ceramic and plastic and metal and other stuff like that. I mean, there's even some out there that are like made out of wood. But for example, succulent and cacti do well in clay or ceramic pots because that allows for better drainage, while plants that need a lot more water will require a pot with larger drainage holes. And it really all just depends on first how big your plant is, and then how often you plan on taking care of that plant and watering it and etc. 2, you want to consider the size of the pot. The size of the pot should be proportional to the size of the plant. Like a large plant is going to look out of place in a pot that's probably only like a half a gallon. Let's say you got a really big plant like a peach lily. You're going to want a pot that's at least a gallon and a half or more in size. So, and then on top of that, a small plant may not thrive in a larger pot that looks like it will be twice the size of the plant because it could end up getting over or underwatered. And then you could also have the chance of the soil drying out too quickly. And then the number 3 is what I mentioned earlier, is you want to choose the right material for your pot, like whether it's made out of clay, plastic, or metal, or like the terracotta plants, or like the terracotta pots, I mean. And then so just basically choose the material that best suits your plant. Our 4th tip on choosing the right type of container would be checking for drainage holes. So you want to make sure the pot has enough drainage holes to allow excess water to drain. Without proper drainage, plants can develop root rot and other issues, like I mentioned earlier, where the top of the potting media at the base of the plant, if it stays moist for too long, that can attract pests, and that in turn can cause more issues down the road, because once your potting media starts to dry out, you're not going to know where those pests went. So you're going to have to look up under all the leaves of the plant to make sure that they're not hanging out under there. So your next tip for choosing the right type of container for your plant is you want to find pots that have like the built-in saucers, or even just buying a cheap plastic saucer from Walmart or something like that. Some pots come with them, and basically what that will do is it will catch that excess water so that it's not draining out onto whatever surface you have it on, or whatever furniture you have it on, ruining that and staining it. And so yeah, just like find a pot with a saucer, or buy one separate and put that underneath the pot that you're using. And yeah. Some tips for when you're buying new plants. I've seen people asking about different things for different plants and stuff like that. So another thing that I tell people is look at the label that comes with that plant first thing before you pick it up, because there's been plenty of plants that I picked up at a store like Home Depot or Walmart, and they have a label on there, but it doesn't give you the name of the plant. It'll give you something like, "Hi, my name is Houseplant. People call me Houseplant," and that's not really very helpful. So if there's no name of the plant on there, even if there is the name of the plant on there, take a picture of the plant first, and then use your phone gallery and just basically scan that picture so that it pulls up something off of Google Lens or Smart Lens or something like that, and gives you a more accurate name of that plant, so that you can look up the care requirements for that plant, so that you know what you're getting into. Number 2 thing that I tell people is look at the size of the plant and the pot it's in, and check the bottom for any roots that might be showing out of the bottom of that pot while it's been in the store, because there's been a few plants like polka dot plants and a couple of monsters that I picked up, and while some plants do like to be a little bit more snug in a pot where they have those roots going around the bottom of multiple times, sometimes when the plants are reaching out of that pot through the drainage holes, it's kind of an indication that it might need to be repotted up to size just a little bit bigger. Decide if you think it needs repotted by looking at that, and then most plants have more than 2 or 3 different plants in the pot themselves. This is more of a case for when you're buying plants from Walmart or Home Depot, because there's plants that I buy from there all the time, like polka dot plants and nerd plants and some of those smaller miniature plants. And they probably have anywhere between 5 to 15 plants per pot, depending on what you're buying. So it's an easy way to get more than one plant out of it. Separate and multiply them as you see fit. The third thing I tell people whenever they're buying new plants is look for signs of pests or diseases. What I mean by this is if you can visually see that a plant is dying, or if there's a lot of dead foliage, or the plants are turning yellow, or they're dripping real bad, that's an indication of diseases or overwatering or pests being on that plant. Look for bugs on the soil. Look on the bottoms of the leaves, like the underside of the leaves, for pests. Look for any dead or dying leaves or dried out leaves hanging off the plant or on the top of the potting media. And then also look for drooping leaves and stems, and this would be an indication most of the time of overwatering, because the roots are being left in standing water for too long, and that causes root rot. And when a root rot starts, then that causes the stem to get soft and start to droop. Number 4 is check the moisture or dryness levels of the potting media that the plant is in. How dry is it? How wet is it? You don't know. So what you want to do is use like a wooden popsicle stick or a craft stick or something like that. Make sure it's long enough for you to stick it into that pot, depending on the size of it. And what you do is you stick it all the way down in there and pull it back out after letting it sit in there for a couple of seconds. And then whatever is sticking to that stick, you stick it up to the outside of that pot and measure it, and whatever depth or whatever height is sticking onto that stick, then that's how much moisture or water is still on that potting media. The 5th thing that I tell people when they're buying a plant is check the type of potting media that it's in. Is it peat moss only? Because I've seen plants that are only in peat moss. But the reason for that is because it retains moisture for a lot longer, so that the company can ship it to the store that is going to be sold. The type of potting media that your plant is in, depending on what it is and how large your plant is, buy another bag of it while you buy that plant, so that down the road you can repot it when it's needed and not have to go worry about going and buying and finding the potting media that it was in at the last second. Like I mentioned earlier, with the 6th thing that I tell people when they're buying a new plant or when they're getting into plants is quarantine, so that you can monitor the plant and make sure that it's healthy enough before you introduce it to your plant collection, so that you don't end up transferring pests or diseases from that plant to your other plants. Watering your plant, I prefer bottom watering when you buy a new plant over top watering, because it's a lot easier and more convenient. Because when you're bottom watering, your potting media is soaking up rather than all that water draining down through it. And sometimes there's fertilizers in that potting media already, and when you water from the top, that washes all that plant food down out of the pot. The next thing I would tell people is trim any dead or dying leaves or foliage off of that plant before you even bring it inside, so that you can minimize the chance of transferring any pests. And then all in all, just keep an eye on the plant and then wipe off anything that you see that needs wiped off. Trim anything that needs trimmed, and then just keep an eye on the moisture levels of the plant. So some things that I wish I knew before I even got into plants, because I learned from trial and error myself on so many different things. Most plants can do okay in a wide range of temperatures. I've learned that most plants can survive temps down to anywhere about 50 degrees, sometimes even 45 degrees, all the way up to somewhere, say, around 85 degrees, depending on the plant requirements. Most of the plants that I have survived in temperatures down to about 40 degrees because, I mean, at night I like it cold, so most of the plants are in that cold weather or that cold temperature, as long as it's not for extended periods of time. Another thing I wish I knew when I got into plants is warm and hot water have a better effect on the plant and the potting media than cold water does. Warm and hot water, not necessarily scorching hot, but like hot to the touch. If your roots on your plant get big enough and thick enough, then you can use a little bit hot water. Warm water is easier to use though because you're not risking a chance of damaging the roots with hot water. Whenever you do water with warm water, what that does is it increases the humidity and temperature around the base of the plant and kind of helps create a little microenvironment, a little bit more humid environment under the plant so that new leaves can come up. Because let's be real, plants do like that higher humidity and warmer temperature of things. So warm water drains just a little bit faster, and then cold water, once it sits in there for too long, it can actually lead to root rot, whether or not you have good drainage. And then the third thing that I wish I knew when I got into plants is lighting needs. So most plants will actually benefit from sitting in sun, full sun, as long as it's not for super extended periods of time. Like I'd say probably maybe an hour, as long as it's windy or there's a little bit of breeze and your plant can get moved around from the wind a little bit, then you'll be fine putting it in full sun. But if you put it in like a window where it just starts getting beat with that direct sun, then you'll probably have to deal with burning your plant a little bit, because out in nature, most plants are not sitting out in full sun. Most plants are hidden under or around trees or other things that kind of shade those plants from that direct sun. But plants being put in direct sunlight will benefit from that because they need that light to photosynthesize and produce their own food and give off the oxygen and be able to absorb the carbon dioxide through photosynthesis and stuff like that. Another thing that I wish I knew when I started getting into plants is when I'm buying new plants, 90% of the time, it doesn't really matter what potting media you use, as long as you make a mixture well enough that plant can thrive in there for at least a season. So, if you're new to plants or you just want something that's more up to date on plant care, be sure to go to my channel on YouTube, like my channel, subscribe, and click on that little bell notification, and that way you don't miss any future updates on my channel. And I'm going to try to do a live stream at least once a week. I don't have a set day for every week yet, but I will update you guys when I do figure it out. And then after this stream, I'm going to work on getting a new video out every Tuesday and every Thursday. And then I'm thinking every Saturday I will probably do the live streams. That way I can do it earlier in the day so more people can be on there watching. And then if you guys have any tips or things that you'd like to ask on my videos, please comment and I will make sure to mention those in my future videos. With that, I'm going to get off of here. I'll see you guys on the next one.